Yo, what's up, everybody? My name is JD, and this is Mull to 5. Before we get started, if you enjoy my janky brews, please take a moment to click the subscribe button. Just that one little click seriously helps out the channel so much, and we would truly appreciate it. Also, thank you to our sponsor, Main Phase Media. You can check them out via the link in the description. And finally, if you have your own spicy deck you'd like to see me play, you can go ahead and leave a comment or feel free to shoot us an email. And with that, we will get straight to the deck tech. And today, again, I'm kind of taking a step back from my usual jank and playing almost like a real deck. Playing something I'm calling Mardu Mentor. So this is basically my take on Mardu Pyromancer. With a few key changes. So I guess first my reasoning. Mardu Pyromancer, first of all, I love the Mardu color combination. It's one of my favorites. I love the Mardu Pyromancer deck. I love the way it plays. It's up my alley. It's my style. But for a few different reasons, I kind of wanted to change it up and put my own spin on it. So the stock Pyromancer deck, as it is currently built, kind of relies on it's basically a black-red deck, lightly splashing white for I think Lingering Souls and maybe a couple sideboard cards. It's a black-red deck splashing white, and it relies pretty heavily on Blood Moon and as one of kind of its like lock pieces, disruption pieces. And to me, Blood Moon seems not as great lately. Of course, it can be backbreaking in certain matchups, but in a lot of the top matchups, they're playing red anyway, like the Phoenix decks, etc. Like they're playing red anyway. People know to play around it. It is possible to play around it basically. So it's not as backbreaking as it should be. Enough so where I am questioning whether it warrants a place in the deck. So my idea was to basically trade Blood Moon for Path to Exile. Because the reason the stock Pyromancer deck does not run Path to Exile is because of Blood Moon. These two don't really play nice together. Blood Moon shuts off non-basic lands. Path to Exile lets your opponent find their basic lands. So these do not play well together. So by getting rid of Blood Moon, it allows us to play Path to Exile, which is an amazing removal spell in the current meta. Like these Phoenix decks, the Dredge decks, just killing a creature and putting it into the graveyard is not great. You really need to be exiling them. So a full play set of Path to Exile seems like where we want to be. Also, the other big change and the main change, and hence the name change of the deck, Mentor, is based around this card, Monastery Mentor. I love this card. It's basically a beefed up Young Pyromancer. So Young Pyro costs a red. It's a red 2-drop, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you create a 1/1 token. Mentor is a white 3-drop with prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create a 1/1 token with prowess. So it's, again, similar effect, just way better. It has prowess itself, and prowess says whenever you cast a non-creature spell. So it's not as restrictive as Young Pyromancer, which requires instant or sorcery. This will trigger off of enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, etc. Any non-creature spell, this thing prowess triggers, and you get a token who also has prowess. However, it doesn't see any play, probably because it costs 3 instead of 2. But I wanted to make it work. So if we're going heavier on white, we might as well bring in the white Young Pyromancer. So I really wanted to build around this card. So because we're bringing this in as our second threat in addition to Young Pyromancer, we are removing the Bedlam Reveler, which is the typical other threat in the Young Pyromancer decks. Now, Bedlam Reveler relies on the graveyard. It requires a certain amount of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard to cast him for a reasonable amount. I didn't want to rely on the graveyard. A lot of the top decks do rely on the graveyard. So there's a lot of graveyard hate out there, and I didn't want to get hit by that hate. We are playing Lingering Souls, which obviously does use the graveyard, but that's really the only card that cares about the graveyard in this whole deck. So we don't get crushed by graveyard hate. Bedlam Reveler, it's going to be really hard to cast Bedlam Reveler if you don't have a graveyard. So that's the other benefit to Monastery Mentor, does not utilize the graveyard. So we don't get beat by graveyard hate, and we get to use Path to Exile. Splashing heavier on white and not worrying about the graveyard hate also allows us to run Rest in Peace in our sideboard, so we get to hate on the other graveyard decks even harder. So those are the main changes and my reasoning behind them. Just basically tweaking Mardu Pyromancer to, taking it in a slightly different direction. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm obviously not the first person to probably toy with this idea. So I'm not saying I'm innovating and breaking the format or anything. In fact, my version is probably just a strictly worse version. But you never know. I love Monastery Mentor. I want to play with it. And for the reasons I stated above, it seems like kind of a cool idea to push in this direction. So anyway, I guess I'll kind of run through a couple other random card choices. We've got Path as our premier removal now, as I mentioned. Also a couple copies of Fatal Push, because it's a 1-drop. It's very efficient removal. We've got our Disruption package, the full 4 Inquisitions, plus a couple Thoughtseize, 2 more in the sideboard. If we're up against combo or something, we really want to be picking apart their hand. Gutshot is kind of a strange inclusion. My reasoning behind Gutshot is that because Monastery Mentor costs 3, we want to make sure we get value out of it. So if you cast this for 3 on your 3rd turn and it eats a Fatal Push or a Bolt or whatever, you just spent 3 mana and didn't get any value out of it. My reasoning was, so you normally have to wait till turn 4 so you can cast this and then cast like a Lightning Bolt if it gets removed, so you at least get a token out of it. With Gutshot, you can cast this on turn 3 and have a free spell to at least get some value out of it. So that's my reasoning behind Gutshot. I wanted a free spell I could cast, so I can run Monastery Mentor out on turn 3 and get some value out of it. So that's why Gutshot is included. And it takes care of random creatures. I mean, a turn 0 Gutshot against whatever, a Birds of Paradise or a Dark Confidant, whatever. It hits some important creatures sometimes. So, it's not the worst card. We're going to play around with it. Bolt, of course, needs no explanation. Young Pyromancer, we've got 1 Terminate in here as additional removal. Splashing White lets us run Lightning Helix, which is a good card. That life gain is pretty important, especially with like Thoughtseize and all the shocks and fetches. Little extra life never hurts. Lingering Souls is amazing. The 1 card that uses the graveyard. So post board, when we're bringing in Rest in Peace, we might side out a couple copies of these. You still get 2 spirits out of it, even if you don't get to use the flashback half. So it's not like it's a dead card. It's just not a great value card anymore. So we might be siding out 1 or 2 of these when I bring in Graveyard Hate. Monastery Mentor we talked about. Colligan's Command, just amazing value card. You get to use 2 of 4 great abilities. So Colligan's Command is great. We're pretty threat light in this deck. I mean, there's 4 Young Pyros, 4 Monastery Mentors. The ability to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand and replay them is pretty big. Because sometimes you just don't find our threats. And sure, we're hitting them with a burn spell or 2 here and there, but without the Pyromancer engine running, generating tokens off of each spell, our deck doesn't perform as well. So returning a threat back to our hand is pretty great. And then topping us off is Chandra, Torch of Defiance. So because we're losing Bedlam Reveler, probably the best thing about Bedlam Reveler is that it basically draws 3 cards. You dump your hand, which is probably pretty empty by the time you cast it, but then you refill with 3 new ones. So Bedlam Reveler is card advantage. Most of the time, you're drawing 3 fresh cards. So by losing that, we're kind of losing some of that card advantage. So I wanted to bring in some sort of value engine, and Chandra is what I went with. Her +1 essentially lets you draw a card. If you can't cast it, you're still doing 2 damage to the opponent, so it's like a shock to the face, which is something. But after you've cast her, you now have 4 mana available the following turn. When you +1, we can cast whatever she flips. So it's basically like drawing a free card every turn. So that's my reasoning for Chandra. We'll see how she plays out. Sideboard real quick. Like I said, the additional Thoughtseizes for combo and stuff. We want to pick apart their hand. Rest in peace for graveyards. Molten Rain. Now, because we lost Blood Moon, we don't have great game against Tron. And I hate Tron. So I've got the full 4 Molten Rains as Tron hate instead of Blood Moon. Combo, he is great against Burn. He's great against Storm. So we've got a couple copies of him. Wear Tear takes care of artifacts and enchantments. In addition to Kolaghan's Command, we now have, 5 copies of Artifact Hate. So that's pretty good. A couple ways to get rid of enchantments. And then Ensnaring Bridge. Against creature-based decks, we're going to empty our hand pretty quickly, and all our creatures are going to have probably 1 or 2 power when they're attacking. So with an Ensnaring Bridge out, we can kind of lock spirits or humans, all these big beefy creatures, from attacking us, and we can still swing in with, say, our Lingering Souls tokens in the air. So Bridge seemed like kind of a cool inclusion that I'm going to test out. Anyway, that's the deck. This is my version of Mardu Pyromancer, calling it Mardu Mentor. And we will see how it plays out. So we're going to take this through a friendly Modern League, see how we do. I'll see you guys in match 1. Thank you for watching.